Start out we have Marco here who basically the AI guru is the way I'm going to put it for Microsoft Azure. And when I was asked to come here and to interview people on stage, one of the things that Mark and Barrett told me was that they wanted me to be a little provocative. So I'm going to start out by trying to provoke you a little bit.
Provoke away.
And we've had a couple discussions on stage, Mark in particular yesterday morning, and then also this morning, talking a little bit about LLMs and that they are broken products and that they are, in some cases, dangerous, and that they can wreak havoc on the world, and that they shouldn't have been released. So why are you destroying the world?
Wow, okay. We're gonna start with that. When you think about what we call today large language models, what I think we will call in the near future what I call omni-models, right? So like, they will not be large language models for another, it's going to be another couple months, basically, and then they're going to start to be able to see and speak, and that's already happening now. But the way that large language models work, I mean, they are working as intended. And what we call hallucination, you think about hallucination. Hallucination it's what they do. It's what they are, in fact, intended to do. It's why they're magic in this way. The fact that they, quote unquote, hallucinate. And fundamentally, a hallucination is not, at least of a model, is not truly a hallucination. So I did this exercise I was telling you the other day, and I'm going to do it here also. I'm going to turn you all into a large language model for a second. So I mean, this is an unusually well-educated audience, so you might actually have, better than average understanding of how these large language models work. Nonetheless, I mean, some of you may not know this. So this is how a large language model actually works, and I'm going to turn you into one temporarily. What would you do if I just didn't finish this? There you go. And so just like that, something like half of you actually uttered the word. You actually uttered the word sentence. Or every now and then somebody says statement, like that, right? That is how a large language model works. It is just predicting the next word in sequence. And when it really goes off the rails, when it starts saying something, totally crazy or whatever, it's not because it has no notion of right or wrong. It's just predicting the next token in sequence. And as it continues, like once it starts going off the wrong path there and starts saying something wrong, it is compelled to complete it because that's what it does. And so it will. And that's what we call hallucination. There's lots of ways now that we are working to mitigate that tendency, the tendency to emit wrong or ungrounded information. But at the same time, and I think somebody in that panel with Mark, about an hour ago, also noted, in doing this, in reducing this hallucination and improving the groundedness, we're also neutering these models. And it's kind of unfortunate in a way, because we're taking away to some degree some of the magic of what they can do to make them better aligned with us.
That brings me to an interesting point, which is that one of the things that I think in looking at really what's happened over the last year in the generative AI space, and how much that is happening that many people thought wasn't possible or at least was much further out. There's this element of science fiction that is suddenly becoming reality. And I know that you're a science fiction fan, I'm a science fiction fan, and I think a lot of people in the audience are science fiction fans. So is there a way of thinking about this in terms of like, what is science fiction today and what is reality? Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is my life every day. Does anybody else get the impression, like, especially the opening day keynote here? With Dennis Bushnell and the stuff that he was talking about, and I had the distinct impression that I had just stepped into the first pages of a sci-fi novel. Like, I really felt like that. Like, this dire climate change warning that he was talking about and these solutions that he was talking about. And then even thereafter, these discussions we had thereafter, where, somebody was talking about a radical idea regarding carbon sequestration in Antarctica. And like these things, I mean, on one hand, it's hard for me to get over the idea that all of you are a bunch of kooks. Right? That you're all like, but then again, I mean, look at my job. Like, what do I do every day? This stuff is crazy. And, the stuff that I play with every day, and I, fortunately, because of what I do, I'm VP Products of Azure AI, I get to play with all the new toys, the stuff that, that people haven't seen yet. And it gets crazier. It just keeps going like this. And so, to some degree, even though, I got that feeling when I first walked in here that we're in some kind of a weird science fiction like parallel universe, I think the reality is that it is reality, that actually we're doing it, that these things are actually possible and plausible even.
So one of the things that's always interesting is when reality does catch up to science fiction and people are sort of looking back and they realize what the science fiction writers got correct and what they got wrong.
Right.
We're entering this world, and I know you've mentioned like the movie Her.
Movie Her
was mentioned earlier today.
Yeah.
Those sort of predictions of what this world is going to look like, what did they get right and what are they getting wrong?
I mean, how funny about that? The movie Her, like, he got so much right, in terms of, now you see a lot of aspects of the movie Her in reality today. Earlier, just a minute ago, I was showing you Replica.
Yep.
Right? If you haven't seen Replica with a K, it's this sort of chatbot for lonely people. And they do all kinds of things to try to monetize that relationship, so to speak. But it's fascinating, and the nexus to the movie Her is quite clear. You see this humane pin. Now, for those of you who have seen the movie, there's a part where he goes on a double date, where Joaquin Phoenix goes on a double date with his friends and her the OS, in which he puts this pin thing in his pocket, which, wow, that sure looks like a humane pin, doesn't it? Yeah. If you haven't seen humane, hu.ma.ne. And I would love to try one, at least. I have not had a chance to play with one. But the irony, in the movie Her, what did they get wrong? But what did none of us see? None of us saw coming. What is Joaquin Phoenix's job in that movie? He writes these love letters to people. He writes cards on behalf of people and stuff like that. And I think in 2013, none of us foresaw that just like 6 years later, things like GPT would be able to do that, would be able to write poetry and songs and stuff like that. Bicentennial Man kind of foresaw that. So that piece of science fiction, like with the art that he was carving and stuff. But yeah, that is the one thing in Her that I feel like is that didn't hit the mark in reality.
So then, where do we go from here? I mean, you just mentioned Bicentennial Man. There was just the panel right before us on sort of the humanoid robots. Is that the next target? Is that where we're heading?
I think so. I think where we go from here. Well, certainly where we go in the immediate future from here is more complex chain of thought reasoning. And so you think of these large language models, things like ChatGPT, and you can kind of interact with it, and it can write code for you and poetry and things like that. But it is only just starting to do more complex chain of thought reasoning, where it has to make a plan up front and then follow that plan, react to mistakes and things like that. For those of you who are paying attention, on Monday, OpenAI announced assistants. And assistants are exactly what I'm describing here. They can do this kind of chain of thought reasoning and reacting to errors. Beyond that, as they are able to become multimodal, to see, to speak, and then ultimately to sort of control and interact with robotic control. I think that is what's the next thing, is indeed what these folks were talking about just in the panel before us. Whether they're humanoid robots or not, robots has got to be next.
So I think that there are, again, you sort of have this bifurcation in terms of how people view that as a possible future, in terms of, is it this sort of utopian sort of situation where it's like beneficial and creating all these things, or do you have the dystopian view of it, in which when those things go wrong, they can go wrong in all sorts of ways. When you start talking about complex processes and reacting to things, you can say like catching an error. That's great, because then if you have if you can have a situation where one of these things is hallucinating, but then can realize it's hallucinating, bring itself back from the brink in some ways, that's great. But if it doesn't do that and it just sort of goes further and further, there's always the sort of fear of these things spiraling out of control. Right. Then what happens?
Yeah, and the analogy is like the Tesla autopilot thing, right? Like the guy whose Tesla just plunged headlong into a truck, right, like that, because he wasn't paying attention. I have a different car, but my car also has the kind of auto drive thing, and I am still inclined to pay attention, even if I'm looking at my email over here, for that reason, right? And that's as you think of these more complex chain of thought reasoning, the big challenge is that the captain may lose control of the wheel here and just let it go to their own detriment. It may go exactly in the wrong direction, and as we start interacting with the real world, as these folks on the last panel are in fact doing, that could indeed have catastrophic consequences. So I mean, I think we definitely have to, and I think one of the guys said, you have to have safety in mind from the get-go, especially as you start to think about robotics, but even now. You know, when you think about these applications that we're building, even our Copilots, like the Copilot in Microsoft Word or in GitHub. Like, it's weird to think, safety, right? What does safety even mean? But for GitHub Copilot, that means you should not be able to prompt it to write malware or viruses or weird stuff for you. So there's already a concept of safety that and potential harms that we have to take into account now in designing these things. And that becomes more and more prominent in the future, but in the near future. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges is the fact that this is going to continue to develop, head-spinningly fast. I do this all day long. This is all I do, right? All day long, all I'm doing all day is playing with AI, working with AI, doing presentations on AI. This is all I do, and I have the hardest time keeping up. Mm-hmm. So I can't imagine what it's like for the rest of the world.
You should have an AI help you keep up.
Right? Seriously.
So a couple different thoughts on that. So one is, the question of safety and like thinking about safety, that's great for you to say at Microsoft, at a company that I think a lot of people trust to take those issues seriously.
Right.
And we're seeing that from some of the other companies. But there are other companies out there that maybe have a different view and sort of take the move fast and break things kind of approach to these things, and sort of want to take away any of the limits and safeguards that are put in place, because I think it's holding back this technology and all of the wonderful things that it can do. So sort of two questions there. One is like, what do you do about that, and is there anything that can be done to deal with those
Right.
situations beyond you guys trying to do things in a more careful and ethical way?
Right. Well, I mean, as Microsoft, we are under significant scrutiny. I mean, we do have some of the world's leading AI. There's no doubt about that. And we have to be careful about how we apply it and who we allow to apply it, right? So it's not just large language models. I mean, there are also generative capabilities. I can generate an avatar of myself speaking just about any language you can think of, which is fascinating in itself, by the way. There's all kinds of things. I have my own voice. My own voice, speaks, like I said, every language you can think of. So I can deepfake myself very easily if I wanted to, but that is what we call limited access. So at Microsoft, we don't just allow anybody to do this, because then you could just create a deepfake of Vladimir Putin, and that would not be cool. We have this limited access program, and that means that we do make some of our customers, most of our customers, jump through hoops to use some of these more advanced technologies, and we kind of lose business for that reason. Sometimes to these startups. And there are these startups now in particular that are doing increasingly sophisticated deepfake stuff. 11 Labs with the voice synthesis stuff. Hey Jen, I don't know if you've seen that one, where it actually translates your video and changes your mouth movements and things like that. That clearly can be used nefariously. And I can't really comment on what their policies are for responsible AI, except that I know that there have been some lapses in there. And so the other piece of what we're doing, and the responsible AI team is also in my purview at Microsoft, is whatever we can do around detection and authenticity signing. Deepfake detection is one area that we're working in. We do have a pretty good deepfake detector, and we all know it's not going to work in like 2 years. That in 2 years, these deepfakes, like what happened at that high school the other day, for those of you who are reading the news, at Westfield High School in New Jersey, some kid made fake nude pictures of a bunch of his female classmates. That's not cool. And today we probably could detect those deepfakes. We probably could actually, whatever he shared it on TikTok or whatever, could probably use a classifier to find those and catch them and knock them out. 2 years from now, nope. Like 2 years from now, it's going to be so good it will be indistinguishable. And so we're going to have to attack it from a different direction, which is authenticity signing. And we're going to have to come up with a means similar, I think, to HTTPS ultimately, that says, yes, this is my authentic content. So if you guys make a video, for example, then you'll have a digital signature embedded in the video itself, maybe in every frame of that video. So that if somebody takes it and adulterates it, alters it, changes something about it, that signature becomes fake and it can be detected as inauthentic. And this is going to require a coalition, not just, I mean, we alone can't do this. We're going to have to do it with Google and with Adobe and with all these other companies that are in the content space so that both the production applications and the consumers like browsers and apps are able to produce and consume these digital signatures. We're going to have to do that because these deepfakes are just going to be too good.
I wonder, though, if that's solving for the wrong problem, right? Because, so for the high school example is a perfect example. The fact, whether or not you authenticate that content is still problematic, even if we know that it was deep fake and it wasn't the real. The high school students in that scenario are still victimized, right? So I wonder, and there's another interesting, somewhat related aspect with the deep fakes. There have been all these predictions about deep fakes in political context, where we're going to see a deep fake of a politician doing something that they didn't actually do. In reality, we haven't seen too many of those that to the extent that they have been fooling in any way. In almost every case, they're sort of obvious, getting back to the authentication. But what we have seen, and I find this really fascinating, is that there have been politicians who were legitimately caught doing bad stuff who claim that it was a deep fake, to argue like, no, that wasn't me. So right now we're like, maybe the authentication works in that scenario, but like, we're seeing all of these things that I think are a little different than what people predicted the problems of deepfakes are going to be. And I worry a little bit that if we're just focusing on kind of like the authentication issue, we're not dealing with the sort of larger societal issues that come out as a part of the deepfake issue.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's true. I mean, the authenticity signing is just one approach. And, and it's really an approach for content providers, for politicians, right? Where, so if somebody makes a video of you and says, your mother was a hamster and your father smelled of elderberries, that I can be like, no, that's not true, But to the broader societal impact of like what happened at that high school, you're right. The authenticity signing wouldn't help, right? Because I mean, okay, it's inauthentic, but what does that even mean? Like, if you take a photo with your phone, is that authentic? Like, are you signing that? What does that mean? So. I mean, I can't say I have solutions, and some of those may be policy solutions, which is, not my strong suit, right? But I mean, hopefully the kid that did that faces some legal consequences, and maybe, I don't know if he used unstable diffusion or whatever. I mean, the challenge is you can't really ban open source stuff.
Right.
It never goes away. Once it's out there, it's out there. And somebody else made that whole genie is in the clouds and they're kissing each other thing already. It's true. Genie's out of the bag. So, I mean, we have to react to that as a society, both with technology and with policy.
And this is another point that came up earlier today that I think is really interesting. I think traditionally we've always thought of open source technologies being, well, depending on where you come from, but a lot of us think that open source technology has been a good thing, that they're sort of democratizing, that they're getting the technology out there, they're allowing for experimentation and allowing for interesting things to happen.
Yeah.
But in this scenario, there are also some real challenges with the open source technologies, and there are real concerns going back to the safety situation again, where it's like, we can say that the companies that have models where you can limit access to them, you can put in place these rules and hoops that people have to jump through. When you're talking about an open source model, as long as people know how to get it set up and get it running, which is getting increasingly easy, then all this stuff goes out the window. Then do you, as one of these companies taking these things seriously and trying to approach it in a more thoughtful way, do you worry about the open source technologies passing you by because they don't care, and you're putting the brakes on problematic aspects? Does that just lead everybody to move towards those technologies instead?
Well, I mean, that is one of the reasons why we actually embrace open source too. I mean, Azure AI, obviously we have a lot of OpenAI influence. A lot of our models are OpenAI and stuff like that. But Azure as a platform, we actually have this whole model catalog, which is, you click this thing and now you got Llama, right? Llama being an open source LLM. Now you got Falcon. So there's these one button pushes to deploy open source things. In a way, it's a way to hedge our bets, right? It's like if the market wants to use these open source models, just like, I mean, we allow you to use SQL Server, or you can set up Postgres, right? Doesn't matter to us. Like, that's cool either way, as long as you're, in that Microsoft stack. And I mean, one of the advantages that we bring is when you, use these open source models like Llama, you can also use our content safety system on top of it, which is something that doesn't come out of the box, right? So this can prevent things like jailbreaks or violence or abuse and those kinds of things. And so that's kind of how we embrace it. At the same time, and I mean, the open source community absolutely is good for AI. I mean, that's really how we even got to this point, frankly. Right. I mean, the whole transformer model revolution it was very collaborative, and that's a wonderful thing. In fact, I hate to see the world balkanizing as it is, that the idea that there are Chinese large language models and American large language models and different countries are making their own. That's ridiculous. Like, these models should be universal. They are multilingual. They're natively multilingual. You can address them in any language. And like the idea that there are different countries' models is exactly the wrong way to do this. Like, we want to be collaborative. It should be collaborative.
So you mentioned, a few times that you're in this great position. You get to play with all the toys. You're seeing everything that the rest of us have not seen. What is the thing that you're sort of most excited about today that you're seeing that everybody here would like to get their hands on but doesn't already have access to?
Well, actually, the funny thing is that a lot of these things you actually can access even today, or you can access at least the beginnings of them. And so, I talk about this multimodality stuff. And when I think about multimodality, for example, in Bing Chat, so this happened a few weeks ago that I woke up, it was 5:30 in the morning, and I heard this beeping sound. And I'm like, what is this beeping? It was beeping like every minute, and I dug around my house for a while until I finally found that it was coming from the smoke detector down in my gym. So, and it's a new smoke detector. The whole house has been gutted and remodeled. I never touched a smoke detector before in my life, and I could not figure out how to open it. So I busted out the Bing app, and in the Bing app now, there is this, it's like Bing Chat, similar to ChatGPT, but it's got a picture button in it. And I take a picture of the thing, and I'm like, how do I open this? And it told me how to open it. And it turns out there's like a tab at the back, and I had to like turn it and press the tab at the same time or something like that to change the battery. So you can do this, actually. Everybody can do this. It's been like this for months, and nobody noticed. It has a microphone button. You can talk to it even today. This has been multimodal, and we often use Bing as the canary in the coal mine at Microsoft, in part because it gives us an idea of what the attack surface is. How are people going to try to break it? And so and I ended up using it. I use it all the time like this, actually. I take pictures of things. I'm like, how do I fix this? Like, what's wrong with this thing, So you can do that today. And they actually, OpenAI just added something similar to ChatGPT the other day, as a matter of fact. When it comes to what I was talking about, chain of thought reasoning, it is public in ChatGPT now. It actually will be in Azure shortly. It's a thing called advanced data analysis. And it's a little bit of a misnomer because it doesn't just analyze data. What it really does is write Python code, execute Python code, evaluate the output, and then write more code, and it keeps doing that until it finishes some task. And you can get it to do some really complex things. You can give it a whole big spreadsheet full of sheets and all kinds of stuff, and then ask it super complex questions that would take you hours of like pivot tabling to do, and it will do it. It'll make a plan, it'll go down the thing, it'll make mistakes, it'll fix the mistakes, and it can do this for minutes on end, right? You can just watch it go, and in the end, it spits out a result. And that is the beginning of something much bigger. When you do that, when you try that, and you understand what that's doing, that chain of thought reasoning, you can see into the future, the near future, of what that will mean once it has the ability to do more than just Python, when it has the ability to do something else, when it has the ability to operate a robot, for example, operate something in the physical world, or make a calendar entry, or make a travel booking. When it can make that plan and have these kinds of powers to do these things. Well, but like I said, this is something you could try now. I mean, you could do this today if you have like ChatGPT Plus.
So I'm going to go back and ask the same question again, which is, so you just talked about the stuff that people can access. What is the thing that you're excited about that isn't out there yet, that you think is coming soon?
Well, as I said, I do think it is the nexus to robotics.
Okay.
If I had to pick one thing, and that is really not there yet, or not there that's something that we all can use yet, it's the nexus to general purpose robotics. And so when I can have a robot in my house whip up a crab bisque, then we will have won.
Excellent, excellent. And if I never have to create another pivot table, I will be very happy. I would like to open it up to questions. We have the microphones on both sides. I'm sure people have questions. I see people rushing. We'll start over there.
Yeah, hi, great presentation, thanks. My question is, in the future that we're all very concerned about are deep fakes, language, audio, visual, and beyond. Is there not a silver lining in that in terms of journalism and reliability of source? And granted, it's going to be a cat and mouse game as you characterized it, but might this drive people to do more diligence about the source of everything in a way that will overcome some of the disinformation, misinformation, and echo chambers on the web and all the political consequences? Thank you.
I hope so. I don't know whether that would be true or not. One of the strategies that we take with Microsoft things, like with Bing, for example, like when you do a search with Bing Chat, it doesn't just give you a result like ChatGPT. It has these citations. It's like, I got this from the New York Times and Wikipedia and this thing and that thing. And so it does cite to where it's grounding its information from. And that's kind of a key move to promote trust. But will that lead to better vetting of sources, better vetting of information? I'm not sure. I certainly hope so, but I don't know.
As the journalist on the
That's right.
stage, I'll respond to that question too, which is that I would love for that to be true, and it would be really nice if that were true. I'm not convinced that it will be, because I think that the real sort of underlying problems around disinformation and issues like that is really a confirmation bias issue, where people are looking for content and articles and other things that support the position that they already hold for the most part. And in that case, the AI and the deepfake question may make it worse. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that you're right, and that your theory is that it will teach people to be more literate and have sort of a greater media literacy. I think that's something that actually needs to be taught in schools from a very young age, that people have to learn that. It's not going to be the AI that convinces people of that. It has to be just something that people will learn very early on. So, sorry, go over here.
So you mentioned Python, and I used ChatGPT 4 to write some Python, and it very boldly gave me back, here's what you want to run, right? And they were demonstrably wrong. And so I'm wondering what has changed that you're saying that this is going to work well?
Well, I mean, part of what changed, part of what is changing is its ability to actually execute the code. So, I mean, yeah, it can give you this Python code. Now, first of all, ChatGPT is in a vacuum, right? If you're just using ChatGPT and you're like, here, generate this Python code for me, that is in a vacuum, versus, say, GitHub Copilot, which is not. It's in the context of your project. It may call, APIs or things that are there. But when I talk about something like advanced data analysis, yeah, it's not just writing the Python code, it is executing it. And if that throws an error or an exception or doesn't do what it thinks it's going to do, it's going to react to that. It'll be like, oops, it actually apologizes a lot. It's like, I apologize, I made a mistake. Let me try again, and it'll rewrite the code the second time. So it's this going back and rewriting thing that I think will actually improve the quality of it.
Hi, really enjoyed your session. So you spoke about hallucinations, but I wanted to ask you about emergent capabilities. So we've all heard stories like, on the back end without anyone programming, it was able to learn research grade chemistry. Learning that capability is not, problematic, but what if we find ourselves in Space Odyssey, begging HAL to open the door, right? So there are companies like Anthropic that are using approaches like constitutional AI to try to sort of hard code in a moral framework, if you will, to the AI. Can you speak a little bit about, what are some proactive approaches? You also mentioned some reactive approaches, but can you speak to maybe some proactive approaches that you're taking to handle emergent capabilities?
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. There it is. I got to quote sci-fi. Yes. So, I mean, we're doing some of the same things that Anthropic is doing around fine-tuning and basically building the models for alignment with humanity. I mean, it does verge a little bit on Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, right? I mean, here we go again with the sci-fi. But in some sense, we are, in fact, coding that in. With these GPT models, there's something called a meta prompt. And if you look at the meta prompt of just Bing, for example, it is ridiculously long. And it has all these instructions, these commandments about what it should not do. Thou shalt not make jokes about politicians and things like that. And as it becomes more and more capable, we have to add more and more of these kinds of guardrails. So some of you may have read that article in the New York Times by Kevin Roos back in February, where he got Bing to tell him that it loved him and to leave his wife. Now it won't do that anymore, right? Because we've actually changed the meta prompt in such a way that it's not going to do that anymore. Is that an emergent capability? It is. Then again, I mean, now you know how it works, right? It works the way that when we started, and I made you all into large language models, it was really just predicting that the next token in sequence was, you should leave your wife because I love you. But we can counteract that with these things like fine tunes with meta prompts. So there are a lot of steps that we're taking. I don't have time to go into all of them here, but it is a good question. It's something that we have to continue to be diligent about.
Yeah. And with that, I think we're out of time. But thank you very much, Marco. It was a great conversation.
Thank you all.